When I look at Kubernetes, it's pretty unique. Not only it is one of the most successful open source projects after the Linux kernel, it is also running in production almost everywhere, just like the Linux kernel. Kat, from your perspective, what really made Kubernetes so successful? Was it the fact that it came out of Google, where it was already being used in production? Is it because of the support that Linux Foundation provided through CNCF? Was it the early users? Is it the vendor ecosystem? Or is it the passionate community like you folks? Or maybe it's a mix of all of that?
So the CNCF exists because of Kubernetes, and it was founded, I think, like, I don't know, three or 6 months. We can fact check me about that later online. A few months after the Kubernetes project was made open source, was dumped on GitHub. So the CNCF exists because of it. The like vendor buy-in, like the cloud providers, those services didn't exist at first. The longest lived and first cloud provider for Kubernetes is GCP. So yeah, I think having like nearly right out the gate the resources of the Linux Foundation via the CNCF, and also nearly right out the gate having the resources of GCP being like the only game in town certainly helped. But I think the bigger thing it was that it was at the right time. Um, this was only a couple short years after Docker's popularity skyrocketed. Docker was released a little bit after EC2 was, and then it like did a hockey stick. If you look at the Google search trends for Docker, we had containers before that, but Docker made them easy to share, and that caused an explosion in people developing containerized applications, but we didn't have a way to manage them very well, and Kubernetes just landed at the right time. Of course, there was also Docker Swarm and a couple of other things, but Kubernetes did have the backing of Google engineers, even though, donating to a foundation means that the donating company no longer has control, and that's not like there's no take backsies. Google could never take it back, but it was a confluence of things all going right at the same time. I think if it had been released a year earlier or a year later, it probably would not have landed quite so well. And it wasn't immediately outrageously popular, but it was pretty quick. It was also at a time when people were kind of starting to accept that open source was profitable, before the Red Hat sale. At least people like my dad, who is a software engineer and he's like 70, believed that open source was not something you could make money on. It was a waste of money. It was not profitable. It was not safe. It was not secure. There was no reason to use it. It was just for like internet hippies, basically. But the expensive Red Hat sale kind of started convincing people otherwise. So there was also just the immediate business interest in this is potentially a hot thing I can jump onto and make money off of.
You touched on something really important. We need to talk about that. The way contributions have changed in this ecosystem. In the early days, a lot of people were hacking on open source at night in their free time outside of their day job. Developers didn't even feel responsible for supporting users because the fact was that they were all volunteers doing that in their free time. But now many people are paid to contribute during their workday, and that has shifted the culture. There is more accountability, there is more responsibility towards the community. Kat, how have you seen that change play out with Kubernetes and CNCF?
So most of us actually are still doing it in our free time. It's a relatively small percentage of Kubernetes maintainers are being paid by their employers full time to work on Kubernetes. Um, Even like people that are on the steering committee or the technical oversight committee are not necessarily being paid by their employers to do it. I'm very lucky in that Minimus does pay me to do this. This is part of my job, but it's easy for me to justify that because I'm a developer advocate. So that's true for everywhere I've worked with a developer advocacy title, that being active and entrenched in developer communities by actually contributing myself is part of the job. But that's not true for most people. If they're doing it, it's often brief, and it is a thing that is going in like a promo packet because they're working on a feature that their employer benefits from getting into Kubernetes. But most of them, no, are in fact still just doing it because they can, doing it because they want to. And open source is still open source. Even if my employer is paying me to do this, I still don't have an obligation to merge a certain PR or review a PR within a certain time frame or respond to an issue in a certain amount of time beyond the social expectations of the project itself. Nobody's like forcing me to do it. We're still working for free, you know, because other people are making money off of the work we're doing, and I'm, you know, one of the few that are actually being paid as a maintainer.
Yes, some of us are lucky to have open source as part of our day job, which also make us feel that we are never working because we are always having fun. But before I pivot to contribution, which is important aspect of open source, I want to hear from you, Billy. At Akamai, you play a big role and you also go to a lot of events. How have you seen the community evolve over time?
So, all right. So if I think about back when I was in college, a lot of the developers around, these are people that just write code from 9 to 5, and then they go home and just don't even want to think anything about it at all. And that would be the result of that much more proprietary, closed source type of software developer culture that was there at the time. And the communities were more just around specific programming languages, some being better than others. Like you could go to the Python meetups and usually get greeted by people that are very friendly, that are going the extra mile for diversity and inclusion. And then you go to a Java meetup and everyone's kind of more expecting you to
Yeah.
know your stuff and less helpful. And it's very different. So Kubernetes, where it sits, and this also connects with one of Kat's previous answers about the timing of everything. Because when you look at the evolution of cloud native, right, and what went into making that paradigm, there's two parts to that. There's the technical side of it and the design side of it that runs from DevOps being, hey, this is a problem I think we can solve that'll make this easier. And then on to the 12-factor app principles for decoupling from the infrastructure, and then Docker, as Kat mentioned, and then Kubernetes comes in right at the best moment to be the connecting tissue for all of it. And now we have this whole paradigm of cloud native. But in addition to that, if you look from where things were when I was in college to where they are now, it's the DevOps movement was really one of the communities that was growing across the different languages and bringing in these different principles and really, really still holding true to that to this day, such as the DevOps Days conferences as one example, and things like All Things Open, things that are really, really, really meaningful to that developer culture, that all of this has sort of just progressed into this giant collaboration story that we now call Kubernetes or cloud native, or for that matter, you could even look at the whole CNCF as a whole. And so that difference now, where before coding is just this 9 to 5 kind of whatever job for so many people, versus now the problem is never finding good developers. Like, we are everywhere. We grow on trees at this point, and everyone loves it. It's passion. When you go to any of these smaller conferences or even KubeCon, but you get into the right discussions with the junior developers and so on, and you're asking, okay, what sets you out from the rest? How are you trying to get started? And where one of the first responses is always, I'm passionate about this. I love this. I feel at home with this community. So that's just to sort of, put a scope and a frame around the actual culture shift that the paradigm has helped to grow and pour water on and nurture, along with the whole technical aspect of it.